My name is Wren Mills. I'm a pedagogical assistant professor at Western Kentucky University in the Department of Educational Administration, Leadership, and Research, teaching organizational leadership and adult education classes. You might be wondering how it is that I came to be using peer review in these classes, because peer reviews are generally associated with writing classes or with graduate work or dissertations or the journals that academics tend to write in. The truth of the matter is that I have my background in English. For 21 years, I taught college-level English and use this as part of almost everyday activities with my students. Everything from thesis statement drafts to opening paragraphs to full drafts of essays and significant research assignments. And so I'm very comfortable with peer review. And when I moved to my first online class in 2004, I took that with me. I didn't even think about it really. I just thought, well, this is how we'll do that. And I moved it online. More and more people are finding the benefits of peer review, and more people are starting to teach online now, especially because of the COVID-19 pandemic that forced a lot of people to move online. And so hopefully, if you haven't used peer review before, you'll consider using it. And if you are trying to find a way to put your peer review online, this 20-minute mentor can help you. The objectives for this 20-minute mentor are to define peer review, to identify tools to use for an online peer review process, to discuss ideas for how to accomplish peer review in an online setting, and to identify keys to successful peer review that you might not have thought about. Defining peer review is something that seems comfortable and familiar because most of us who work in academia already know what peer review is. But for our students, it could be kind of a confusing process. We're not experts in anything. Why should we be reviewing? That's the most common thing that I get out of freshmen whenever I ask them to swap papers and do some peer reviewing for each other. When I look at the dictionary and share that definition with them, the evaluation of a person's work or performance by a group of people in the same occupation, profession, or industry, I point out to them it doesn't say that you have to be an expert. It just says you have to be in the same occupation. And you're students in this class, and therefore you're in the same occupation and are completely qualified to review each other's work, just to get that extra set of eyes on it, to help find any mistakes, to help maybe find a missing element of the assignment. And so this is something that students struggle with a lot, and I think is important, is actually defining for them what peer review is. Many disciplines will encourage students to use peer review, but I think it's also something that we see as taking up a lot of time, and so we tend not to do it. We glance over it, we send students to the Writing Center, or we make it optional, and we all know that optional means that most students won't do it. And so in taking it online, it offers you the opportunity to continue to do peer reviews in your class, or to start doing peer reviews in your class to help your students do better on written assignments. And it also saves you the class time. You get that time back for content that you might need. Something that's important to think about is how are you going to get your students to buy into this and do peer review if it's not something that's typically done in your discipline. I think students expect it in English classes and writing classes. That's something that I don't think we have to explain to them why they're doing it. They understand why. But students tend to think in boxes. And when I first started introducing peer review into my organizational leadership courses, there was a little bit of pushback, I'm not going to lie. But at the same time, students started seeing the benefits to it. And so I think that it helps them, and they know that when they take a class with me, they can expect they're going to have a peer review of their major paper, and that it's going to help them find things that they wouldn't have necessarily found on their own. I think one of the most important things to motivate students is teaching them actually what peer review is, not just giving them that definition, because that's just, the tip of the iceberg. I actually like to make sure that before the first lesson in which students have to do a peer review, I have them learn exactly what a peer review is, what it looks like, what it is, and what it isn't. I have an introduction to peer review module that gives them definitions, that gives them examples, that gives them do's and don'ts, and then they have a quiz at the end of it so that they're able to see what good peer review feedback looks like and maybe what not so great peer review feedback looks like. And it does seem to help improve the quality of the feedback, especially among my first year students who may not have ever been talked to about what this actually means before. They were just asked to swap papers and read them for each other, perhaps. So taking the time to do that, whether creating a short video that talks about it, creating a learning module like I did in Blackboard, I think there's some definite benefits to that. It can help students to feel better about it. I also tend to use adaptive release in Blackboard to help motivate students to do peer review. And some people will disagree with this, and that's okay. But basically, if students can't see the place to submit their final paper, they're more likely to do that peer review. And that's what I do. And I'll talk about the process that I use, my sequencing of events for a peer review, but I heavily use adaptive release to hide key components of a major assignment until they complete certain steps for me. Another thing to think about is whether or not you want your peer review to be worth something. Is this going to be a grade on its own? Is it going to be actually a component of the paper grade itself on that rubric? Or is it maybe going to just be a deduction? And this is what I've moved to over the years. I make it worth 10% of their paper, but it's not 10% of their grade. It's if you don't do this, you lose 10% of your grade. So it's not seen on the rubric. It's just seen in the syllabus as a policy. And I make sure to remind them of it every single time that we have a peer review. So if they don't do the peer review, or if they do a bad peer review, they suffer consequences on their final paper. So the question that we're looking at today is, can you do peer reviews online? And the answer to that is absolutely. I tend to use discussion boards, but I've also used blogs in my learning management system. But there's the newfangled ways of using web conferencing or screen capture videos, or tools like Voicethread or Flipgrid to do it. Whatever it is that you want to do, it's probably possible. If you want students to do this synchronously or asynchronously, you can definitely do it online. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is doing a discussion board or a blog, because that's what I use and it's what I found to be most effective. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to try some of the others in the future. I found that I preferred the discussion board over the blog simply because of the way that it threads conversations if more than one student happens to comment on a paper. And that way it's easy for me to see not just who is talking to whom and for the student who is reviewed to see that, but also if the two reviewers start talking to each other and maybe backing up what each other said or pointing out, oh no, you missed this, they did do this in this place. And so for me, just for ease of reading, the discussion board always wins. Blogs do have the advantage of students considering them to be a little less formal and maybe a little more friendly because they're used to reading blogs online. And so students might like that a little bit better, and you might want to try it. The only reason that I don't use blogs is because I don't like the way that they thread the comments. And I can't see that necessarily a reviewer, if they're, like I said, if there's more than one reviewer, if the two reviewers are talking to each other or talking back to the original person or what's going on there. So that's just my personal preference. You should play with it and see what you like and see what your students like. I also have a very specific sequencing for reviews, and this can apply to all the different tools and methods of doing a peer review. So I wanted to talk through that and tell you how I do it on the discussion board first. First, I have students submit their papers to a plagiarism detection program. We have Safe Assign built into Blackboard, and so that's what I use. And this gives the students also something to do and look at and work on their own drafts while they're waiting to get that review back from a classmate. So I have them do that first, and I actually use adaptive release with this. So they can't see the actual discussion board link to submit their draft to until they have submitted their paper to Safe Assign. So once they've submitted that draft to Safe Assign, up pops the discussion board link for them to then do the next step that would normally come in a peer review. I'm going to interject a kind of step 1.5. I've actually got it listed as step 2 on my slides, that the very first peer review, I don't know if you remember that I said, I do an introduction to peer review module so that students have to learn about what is a peer review, what does good peer review look like, what are things you're not supposed to do during a peer review, and then they have a little quiz over that just to make sure they understood some key concepts about being very specific in their comments and being constructive as well. So once they do that, the very first peer review, and they take that quiz, then that discussion board link will pop up for them. So once they can access that discussion board, the next thing that they do is they create a thread on the peer review discussion board and they post their paper as an attachment. I ask them to do this in Word because that seems to be an accessible format that everybody can use, and it seems to also be the easiest for them to use at this time with peer reviewing tools that are built into Word. Notice I say that they do it as an attachment. They don't copy and paste in the board because I want them to be able to download it and actually mark it up, very similar to like we probably all do with projects when we're collaborating with somebody. I also encourage them not to just post their paper, but if they have any concerns, they know that they have a problem with, I'm really bad with run-on sentences, or I have a tendency to have weak introductions, and can you tell where my thesis is? Because I'm not really sure that that's clear. I'm maybe muddled. What is it that you want specific help with, specific things for your reviewer to look at? So I encourage them to do that. Then after they've posted their own, I ask them to go and reply to a classmate's paper that they've claimed it so that we know that everybody's got coverage. Nobody's being left out. And I let them choose how they're going to do this. Some of them say, I've staked my claim, and some of them just say, I will review your paper. But the important thing is that message is posted so that students can then that come after them can scroll through the discussion board and see who still has a paper available for review. Once they have claimed the paper, I ask them to download it and save it, and then use track changes and comments in Word to go through and read and give general feedback on the paper overall. This is something that sometimes you're going to have to maybe provide a tutorial, and I've done a screenshot tutorial with my students to tell them how it is that they can use track changes. And students pick up on this very quickly if they've never done it before, and so it's very easy for them to get in the hang of that and the habit very quickly. If they're reviewing PowerPoint files, which some people use for peer review on projects, students can still use the comments or even the note space underneath the slides to be able to do this. But they always have a way to comment and give feedback to one another. I also have them use a peer review form that I have created, and it's specific to every assignment, and it does a few different things. It will ask each student to, think about this paper you just read. Did it do these things that were required for the assignment? It also has them check their APA. It has them go back and tell them, do you have a lot of spelling errors? Or are there errors that I knew they weren't right, but I didn't know how to fix them? And give general feedback as well. But the big thing for me is going through the main components of each assignment, their requirements, and saying, well, you were supposed to do A, B, and C in this paper. Did you do them? And if not, this is important. Now you have the chance to be able to do that. And then after they've done both the actual draft review and the peer review form, they upload those back to that thread along with any other final comments they want to make to that person. Once they've participated in this peer review fully, so that means there's 3 posts on the discussion board. They've posted their draft, they have claimed a paper, and they've posted the feedback back to the draft that they claimed. Then the paper submission box will then open for them via adaptive release, so they're able to submit their own paper once they've revised it. So that's how I do that on the discussion board. The web conferencing idea that I mentioned earlier, or doing a screen capture recording, you can also do in the same way. You can use that discussion board or the blog to post drafts because students need a place to be able to put those. You could also create a Google folder where you have everybody upload their drafts, but that might be a little harder to see who is whom on that. So I would recommend still using the discussion board or blog for students to post those drafts to exchange. I again ask them to use track changes and comments to review, and then have the reviewers record themselves going over that paper and the feedback that they left. So they can do this with the screen share component and leave a nice, here's my face, here's the tone of my voice. You can see I'm trying to be a helpful, friendly classmate video for their classmates. You may want to provide a guide of what to discuss, just like I said with the peer review forms that they were doing for me on the discussion board and submitting back. And when they upload this back to wherever they got the draft from, the discussion board, the Google folder, or the blog, make sure that they're giving a link to the video and not uploading the link itself. And this is especially important if you're doing it within your learning management system, because if too many people load actual videos, it can crash your course in your learning management system. And I know that you don't want that to happen. It will cause so much frustration for you and a lot of panic for your students. Voicethread and Flipgrid are tools that are very similar in what they do and provide a little bit more organization than maybe just using a Google folder if you want students to be able to record feedback to one another. 2 of my colleagues at WKU did a study in 2016 using Voicethread to see how students reacted to it and see how they used it. And I became interested in Voicethread because of this. And what they found between face-to-face undergraduate students and online graduate students is the students did tend to like it. And one of the big reasons they liked it was they got to hear their classmates' thoughts versus just reading them. And so having that tone of voice, being able to see a little bit of body language made a difference to them, especially for the students in the online-only class. But even the face-to-face students reported enjoying that. They also talked about how they prepared their comments for Voicethread assignments a little more in depth than they might have for a regular discussion board because they had to practice reading it, make sure it sounded okay before they recorded it, and then finally make the recording. Some of them even confessed, I remember them sharing with me that Sometimes they would record multiple times before they would save it because maybe they stumbled or they weren't perfect, not realizing that, in everyday conversations we're not perfect. It's okay if you're not perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect when you post it. But they did still enjoy being able to talk to one another that way. But they also felt that they were able to express and receive from classmates a much greater depth of ideas and comments. And so that might be a reason that you want to use, instead of just static discussion board feedback, using either the web conferencing or screen capture idea or something like Voicethread or Flipgrid. Voicethread and Flipgrid are both very similar tools. They pretty much work the same. Voicethread has a limit on how many students you can put on it, and there is a fee to use it. At the time that I'm making this, it says on the website that it's $99 a year, whereas Microsoft makes Flipgrid free for use at this time. So that's something you may want to consider as well. I think that students have found Flipgrid a little bit easier to use than Voicethread when I've tried it in my experience, and when I've been a student having to use it myself in one of those two tools. So if they're going to do the Flipgrid or Voicethread, again, they would post their paper somewhere to be reviewed, that discussion board or the blog or wherever it is that you want them to store that. And again, use track changes and comments to give some feedback and review that paper. And then instead of writing out lots of comments, they're going to reply orally. But based on what Kirby and Hulan's study showed, they're probably actually going to still write those out. So you can tell them that they can still share those via writing if they want to, but encourage them to do the actual voice, the oral feedback, because students seem to really like and respond to that. The important thing is to remember them not to just give those oral feedbacks, but to also upload the paper. I have found that students forget that key part, and I have to go and poke them about it. So once you've picked your tool and you've decided how you want to try to do this, there's some final details that I want to make sure that you consider too. What is your timeline going to be? Now, for me, I dedicate a week for peer review in my classes, and that's generally the only thing that they're doing that week. But the actual thing that I have found is that students don't ever post their papers until the deadline of when they're supposed to be posted. So I tell them they have to be posted by Friday night, and by Saturday night, they need to have sent the review back to whomever they are reviewing the paper for. So what I've found with that is that high achieving students will typically have their paper draft early, and they will get that submitted much earlier in the week and do the review and submit it back and even submit the final paper before the weekend. So this poses a question for you. Do you want to let students actually choose who they're going to review, or do you want to pair them up? I've always tended to do it as a matter of convenience because I know some people can't necessarily wait until last minute for their partner to post their paper. You can always move the deadline up, but it doesn't necessarily mean that posting is going to happen, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the problem that I found in teaching composition courses is that my A and B students were reviewing my AB students, and my CDF students were reviewing my CDF students, because you can guess who turned in early and who waited till the very last minute to post things. Something else that I do are instructor safety checks. And this means that on Saturday mornings, I go in and I check to make sure that everybody's draft has been claimed. And if it hasn't been claimed, I send out a quick email saying, hey, so-and-so doesn't have a reviewer yet. Can somebody step in and do this? If I see there's just maybe 1, 2, or 3 students that haven't claimed yet, I will just email those few students and say, hey, you guys aren't reviewing anybody's paper, and your paper hasn't been reviewed yet or claimed to be reviewed yet. So why don't you 3 get together and decide who's going to review whom's paper and get that done? And then I also go in and I check on Sunday morning to make sure all the reviews get posted back. And if they haven't, I usually send an email to the people who claimed a paper but didn't post it back, give them a little poke and tell them, hey, don't forget to post that back. And it's very rare that they don't have them back by lunchtime. But people do slip through the cracks. People don't get reviewed, or people don't get their reviews back until it's too late. I've had people commonly turn in reviews on Sunday night at the same time as the paper is due. And so that is something to consider, is how is it that you're going to implement some safety checks to try to make sure that your students are all getting coverage and all getting their drafts back. You should also think about, are you going to grade these peer reviews? I mean, are you actually going to go into each one and look at it? Are you going to spot check? Maybe you're just going to ask students to let you know if they got a poor review or not, so that you can then decide if you're going to be penalizing for poor reviews, that you need to go and do that. But thinking also, as I said earlier, are you going to grade this or not? Is it going to be a separate grade, or do you just get credit for participating? You see that they posted, they claimed a paper, they returned a paper, they get the credit for it. Thinking about how you're going to do that is something you need to do on the front end, and then make it very clear within your syllabus and your policy about what it is that their grade for peer review is going to be, if it is going to be a grade. I want to share some keys for success with you that will help your peer reviews go better, both for you and for your students. First of all, I think you really need to work to build community in your class, be it an in-person class where you're moving this stuff online, or it's a fully online class, before you do the peer reviews. And this is because when students know each other a little bit better, they're just going to help give each other better feedback. It's not going to feel like a stranger. There's going to be a little bit of skin in the game because they know who people are. So doing something to build community would be good. There are 20-minute mentors that address this if you're in online classes and aren't sure how to do this in an online environment. I also really think you need to discuss what it means to peer review, be that doing a short video, posting something for them to read, or creating a learning module like I did for my students. And also think what's going to work best for your class, letting them pick who they're going to review, or if you are going to group students together deliberately for certain reasons, maybe because you don't just want all the A students running in early, doing those peer reviews, and then ducking out before anybody else has a chance to look at their work. Because peer review isn't just about getting feedback, it's about seeing what other people are doing too and learning from their writing styles. But whatever method that you choose, you need to provide clear directions and know the first time is probably going to be bumpy. I'm not going to lie to you about that. If you do multiple peer reviews in a class, then the first one will be bumpy, but it gets better after that. And usually after the first one, I don't have to answer any questions. I don't have to redirect people. It just gets taken care of. Students get in the swing of things. Peer reviews can be a little bit different if they aren't used to doing this in an online class and online environment for. So having those clear instructions can be exceedingly helpful. So wrapping up here, peer review is possible online. I've been doing it since 2004. I've done it with everything from developmental level students all the way through graduate students. And everybody's been able to get in the swing of things and get it done and benefit from it. And there's lots of research out there that shows that doing peer reviews does improve students' writing. Peer review isn't just for writing classes, though, so I do hope that if you're not in a writing-heavy discipline or teaching English, that you are considering doing this. You're going to see a benefit in your students' work. You're going to see that there's fewer little bitty errors that they've missed because they just simply memorize their papers when they write them, and their brain doesn't really read them anymore after a certain point, so it's easy to miss that stuff. So I hope that you're able to try this soon in your classes and that you have success with it like I have. Thank you for listening to this 20-minute mentor. We'd love to have your feedback. Please participate in the survey.